Welcome back, everyone, to the E2KG Network. This is the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is our main show. This is Monday night, and we are here again to kick off another week to give you some thorough discussion on a topic, maybe a little more focused than last week. But back with me here again tonight is Swissguard. Hello, Swiss. How are you, sir? And Swiss is Mike is.
Yeah, all right. I'm
Good morning.
getting off to a terrible start here. In my defense, I've been up since 3:30 a.m. because I have young children. So
that's a pretty good defense. We'll take that on this show. Yeah. So yeah, we are definitely pushing the borders of your attention span here. So yes, if you can't hear Swiss, it may mean that he has fallen back asleep, or that we have just we've convinced him that the rest of this podcast is not exciting enough to keep going. So, but tonight we are also joined by Zeus Damas as he's kicking out onto the social networks.
And Swiss, there's no shame in bending the knee if you need to bounce out. I don't want you to bounce out. I just want to throw in my Game of Thrones reference there. So it's all good.
Well, that works. So while Zeus and I continue to drink our caffeinated liquids, Swiss will keep poking himself in the eye and continue this podcast. And hopefully, over the course of the next 45 minutes, it does not feel like we are poking you in the eye and irritating you as you listen to us, whether it's tonight or whether you are watching this later in the week. Feel free always to post down below in our comments. Give us some feedback. Last week, we went off for a little while on the state of games and some of the interesting and maybe less palatable business practices in terms of some modern gaming, whether that's free to play or paywalls, locking some of that content behind initial investments or continued investments of blind boxes and other types of things. We had lots of topics to talk about last night as we talked last week. Tonight we're going to try to focus it in a little bit more, but we're gonna end up covering a little bit of the gauntlet as well. So stick with us. And tonight our big topic here is, while we were negative last week, this week we're going to be positive. We are going to turn it around back on the industry and talk about some of the crazy risks that the big publishers, the console makers, indie devs are doing to push this industry forward. Some practices, some trends, some things that we see within this generation over the past year, a couple years or so, that is exciting and invigorating, and that gives us some hope for the future. So that not only is this podcast enough to keep going, but our hobby and our favorite pastime gives us enough to keep going as well. So that's our kickoff. And we're always going to save some time to get through some playlists. I'm sure I'm going to have some time to update you guys on my pitcher in MLB The Show, tell you about his rise to stardom, and see what else people are playing, what has been keeping Swiss alive and awake early in the morning with his kids. But first, let's turn to this topic. So tonight, we're talking about some of the trends, some things that are exciting for us. And actually, Zeus, I'm going to kick this back over to you, because this was something you had pitched up after our discussion last week in terms of, what are some of those crazy risks that game developers, whether they're big or small, are taking. So do you have some thoughts here?
Yeah, so this topic was actually inspired by another podcast that I was listening to. I think it was, maybe it was Game Scoop. Over at IGN, but one of the things they touched on but didn't really go into a lot of detail about was some of the we chose not to use the term progressive, but it's kind of hard for me to describe it without utilizing that term, but some of the progressive, innovative, new approaches to gaming business models. And we're going to try and tighten it up, but it includes some manner of game delivery, right? In terms of how we play, what we play, when, where, how, what we look like on screen when we play. But it also includes things like new pricing models, right? And maybe the positive aspects of it. I think we kind of covered the negative ones we viewed as negative last week. But this week we're going to maybe look at some of the ones that are positive. The one I'm going to start out with, we talked about recently. We didn't talk about the pricing, but last E2KGN30, our short format news show, we talked a little bit about how EA is kind of honoring diversification in terms of having women players in the WBA in its upcoming NBA game. But then the other thing that was very interesting that I didn't know was they are launching the game at an MSRP of $39.99. So it undercuts the standard MSRP for games these days, which is $59.99. It's kind of a page from 2K's playbook a few years ago when they were the beleaguered underdog in the sports game space, and so they launched one of their 2K titles, I think, at $19.99, in a highly aggressive move. So it's just very interesting to see EA come at it. They have consistently been the behemoth in the industry space, and here they are coming out with this reduced price model. So thoughts on that you guys had? Does that encourage you to buy the game? Does it discourage you from buying the game? I don't know if you guys were big NBA players or sports game players, but I know the thing that made it catch my interest was, I have typically with these annual release sports games kind of rotated what platform I would buy them on. So I'm unlikely to buy 2 iterations of NBA on Xbox 2 years in a row, but I might buy it on Xbox 1 year, buy the next one on PS4, and buy one on PC. So the notion of getting this for $39.99 on PC at a reduced price definitely makes it much more competitive with other titles that are coming out on PC at the same time. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
We're having back and forth here. So I'm not a huge sports gamer, so it's probably not going to inspire me to pick it up just because it's not a genre I'm a huge fan of. I've had some of the Madden games back in the day, but the whole yearly iteration is a little bit distasteful to me. I don't like buying games that have tweaks. So the price reduction for me would makes it much more appealing. Because you're not, paying $60 for for an enhancement. In other words, they're not like restarting the game from scratch and you're getting a whole new experience. They build it, they can work off the previous engine, and they're not trying to, I don't want to say rip you off, but it makes it more palatable for me to view it as an annual perhaps purchase. So I think it's a good thing, and I think it's interesting that it's EA doing it, like you said, because when you mentioned the price break, that's the first thing that popped to my mind is that Terrell Owens on the 2K, and I think that was the catalyst, I believe, for EA basically purchasing the rights to the NFL exclusively, the league, because that game was so successful at the reduced price. So. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a positive step.
Yeah, I think it's a really good step. One, I think it makes a lot of sense market-wise. So this is NBA Live, which has been, abysmal, and it has a couple of failed releases over the last couple of years, right? 2 years ago, they put out or 3 years ago, they put out a demo, and, that it got such bad social media and internet traction that they pulled it and never released the game. This is the same franchise that before then also had given demos to journalists and to media outlets and then never released the game because it wasn't in a sustainable build, that there were enough bugs with it. So this really has some kind of brand recognition or kind of brand repair that it needs to do. And so I think coming in at a reduced price, the $40 is maybe still, would have been more interesting if it came in at that 2K 15 or 2K 5, right? That was NFL 2K05 with the $20. But I think that the $40 probably does give people a little bit of a pause. I think the challenge here, though, is going to be when NBA Live launches, because NBA 2K18, which has been a juggernaut for 2K, is coming out in the 15th, 18th of September, and so that window for EA is relatively small. Now, I did have a chance to play the demo a little bit, and as somebody who has played basketball games back in 8 and 16-bit, but even 32-bit on PlayStation was one of the early games I played. I haven't got into a basketball game lately, so it did take me a little while to try to figure out some mechanics, but it seemed relatively functional and relatively easy to pick up. I'm going to come back to that demo and see a little bit more, but it has given me some incentive to look at it a little bit further. As somebody who's an EA Access subscriber, it gives me 10 hours and a discount to kind of play around with that game a little bit more. So hopefully it does provide EA a little bit of a foothold. I think that, to me, the more exciting piece, other than the price tag, because these games get discounted by the end of the season anyways, is the WNBA inclusion here. The inclusion of female teams, of licensed and franchises, and I think is a really key piece to kind of broadening that audience and not just making it about a male-dominated endeavor. So I know you guys covered that a little bit on the Thursday night show, but I think that that's a really interesting piece to me. At the price point, I think is something else to talk about, right? And Zeus, you had a chance to play Lawbreakers back when it was, betaed out and, alpha at the back in North Carolina. It's come out on. It's come out now at $30, and it's getting some mixed pieces. There's news stories out there about how big that player base is in its opening weeks, but I think it's doing an interesting piece, is kind of targeting that mid-level price point, right? Coming out at $30. I think that's another interesting move, is the potential for, what is the other Ninja Theory game that just came out as well, that is coming in at that $30 price point. So kind of the return of those mid-tier price games, I think, is an interesting piece.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that is huge, right? Because we have spent so many years, the larger part of, the tail end of, well, I guess I would say all of console generation 7, really, right? In a good chunk in the first opening years of this generation, talking about how, the increasing ballooning budgets of AAA games and the advent horizon of big movements in indie games kind of squeezed middle games out, right? There was no middle game. So that has definitely been back on the rise, and it's been great to see. I hate to say it, it's not to disparage any indie developers, but most of the time, a lot of indie games, I won't say all by any means, a lot of indie games fail to capture my interest due largely to their graphical quality, an approach that, low budgets inherently kind of drive you in a certain direction of more cartoony graphics in a lot of cases, and that just doesn't appeal to me. But the notion of a game that has kind of AAA game design and style, but is maybe a shorter game or not as complex a game, works for me when you're gonna allow it to debut and charge $30 to $40 for it instead of $60.
Yeah, I think another great example of this, so Hellblade is the Ninja Theory game that just came out. I think another example of this is coming up at the end of this month, which is the Uncharted Lost Legacy game, right? Where this is $40 for a disc-based game, or for download, it's going to include a Jack and Daxter game, or if you still have the Uncharted 4 DLC, it comes with that. But I think it's going to be a 10 to 12 hour story-based game. The previews sound pretty good about it, but again, it's coming in that mid-tier. I think before I kick it over to you, Swiss, the flip side of this is, and maybe something else that we can talk about, and is when those kind of mid-tier games, or games that probably should be mid-tier, get pushed up into kind of full-on $60 price tag, right? And so this week in the news, you've got a lot of coverage about No Man's Sky coming back in, and now you can pick that game up for $20 on a regular basis, where for a $60 game, you know, whether or not that was worth it at the time is a whole different type of question. So,
and I'm sorry, was there already DLC for No Man's Sky?
So they've been slowly releasing some DLC. They had 2 big DLC releases. They had one back in the spring, which created some base building pieces, and then some other that did some additional transverse and some expansions of the universe there. But this is kind of the big one where they've added some multiplayer, although not like full-on multiplayer. And then some, you know, the multiplayer here is where people can join you on your planet, but kind of in like a glowing orb type of way. And they've added about a 30-hour story mission. So again, lots of content, but coming, you know, if this was coming months afterward versus a year afterward, maybe it's a different conversation.
Damage has been done.
Yeah, and it's it has been roughly a year since it released, didn't it? Wasn't it? Yeah. So I mean, and we'll probably talk about it in more detail, or we'll move on to what Swiss wants to talk about. But this is an interesting new take on things being done in the industry from a business perspective that have historically not been permitted, right? So the notion that there was all the thing about the weirdness of the hype and marketing behind No Man's Sky, even though it was kind of arguably, by definition, an indie title. But then what team is allowed to then lock themselves in a room for a year correcting the problems? And it might arguably be something that Sony's doing, because Drive Club kind of did the same thing. Drive Club came out. It was supposed to be the flagship racing title for Sony, because we only release Gran Turismos once a decade. But Drive Club was much maligned, you know, similarly in the way that Forza 5 was with the Xbox One launch, where they nickel and dimed everybody with microtransactions. It was unclear what you were getting, and people were angry. So there was that, but then there were also some content problems. That team, same deal, right? They went behind closed doors they were a little more exposed because their game was online. You know, by error or poor marketing or whatever, there wasn't online for No Man's Sky. But Drive Club kind of still went away for about a year and then came back. And as we talked about recently, and as I have on Rounding Off Infinity and on Gearworks.com, you know, part of my commentary about that is it's a pretty sharp racing game, like a year after the fact. It's not, I don't think it's the thing that twisted people into a bunch a year ago. So it's fortunate that we're in this weird space where the big publishers are approaching these business models differently, and it's affording games and teams like the team behind No Man's Sky an opportunity to kind of go back and return with the game that they maybe originally intended. And they still have tons of room to develop on top of it and do DLC and still carry it further.
Right. That was when you mentioned, you know, what team has the ability to you know, fix the game, quote unquote, for a year after the fact. I think Sony probably viewed No Man's Sky as not just a game, but a platform. I mean, you got a space open world sim. So, you know, you get a lot of people in, and I think they were banking on there being many, you know, years of content and, you know, well, whatever that DLC packs or microtransactions or whatever form it would eventually take. But you know, World of Warcraft, I'm not saying No Man's Sky is World of Warcraft, but how long is that game? When did that game come out? Back in 2007 or something like that?
2003, 2004.
Yeah, I can't even remember. So it's been making money for Blizzard for a long time, and I'm not saying that No Man's Sky is supposed to be an MMORPG, but Sony is probably investing in the long term in that.
Wait, Swiss, I got to stop you, because
Okay.
I'm not sure that, sorry, I don't mean to get overexcited, but so I'm going to push back against that, though, because I don't know that Sony is the one that's supporting Hello Games. You know, I think that after a couple of months of press and bad press. The Sony came out and kind of said that they were disappointed in No Man's Sky and the performance of it. From everything that I've been reading about these updates, and I have been reading quite a bit because I have a disc copy that I haven't really put in since Christmas time, is this feels like there is no Sony messaging that's coming from this. I haven't seen anything from Hello Games that has talked about continued support from Sony to make this possible. It all feels like it's internal, whether it's a make good, whether it's a kind of a building back up their brand, or it's maybe they made enough money off that initial Sony deal that they were able to sustain themselves for a year to allow them to get to this point. But that's the part I don't know is where a studio has the money to keep doing this if you're not bringing in that revenue.
That's a good point about Sony. I guess I don't know the internal dynamics very well, but I mean, at some point, right, they're not going to be making this DLC for free. So, you have to, I guess I want to look at it as an investment. So, I just can't see it as, oh, well, we made all this money and we got all this bad press, but is Pride enough for them to work for multiple years, just kind of pushing out these updates just to kind of reclaim their name? Or do they still believe, maybe it's not Sony, maybe it is Hello Games, they believe that they can still make this work and it can still be 5 years down the line, look back and say, you know what, they probably just went out too early, they probably got pressured maybe by Sony to release it too early, and it became, after a rocky start, it became a thing. So
I think that could be, I'll just follow up on this, Zeus, and I'll take it over to you. I think that could be a real key point in terms of maybe Hello Games' strategy, is that if they build this back up and show that they are investing when they pitch a DLC pack or some other expansion, then there may be a little more availability of the consumer base to buy into that. So Zeus, I'm sorry to step on you, but go ahead.
No, I'm just going to go ahead in the light of no information. I'm going to go ahead and give the credit to Hello Games, right? So just to walk it back a little and talk through, to remind any listeners of what these guys are. I don't think it's an investment because there is no pot of gold for these guys to invest, right? It's three dudes, like literally it's three dudes. And if we recall, right, this is the team who I think they were impacted maybe by Hurricane Sandy or some other storm, but their offices were flooded. And all of that equipment were things that they procured out of pocket. So they were essentially wiped out. It delayed them for a few months. I'm sure they were struggling to figure out where the money was coming from. And my guess, as we talked through business models last week of how games get published, is that they were given a one-time funding by Sony. Maybe they got a booster shot to help them get through the storm impact, but I think when they got paid, they were paid. And I don't know if there was any back-end revenue model. So my gut's telling me that this is Pride, that these guys went away and just wanted to finish the objective that they started, right? So and I will say it was three guys at the outset. I think after the game launched, they had some additional people on board for support. But if there was an investment, that's an investment that they probably owe somebody money back on.
So I'm going to take this and keep moving our topic in terms of other developments here. And I think the conversation we're having around No Man's Sky and whether a game release versus where it is, the state of the game a year later, I think that is a great example of where games are doing something a little bit more here. I think you can take some positives to that of the value of big name titles a year out from where they were, something like, Battlefront or even Destiny, the Taken King, that where they were at launch versus where they were a year out is a whole different revenue piece. I think I don't know if that's a positive piece because it doesn't really reward early investors or early adopters in terms of gaming. But I think that idea of early access and the acceptability of early access, how many games are out on early access now, whether it's on Steam or even now on the consoles, that there are a number of early access models. The big game of the summer, right? PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds it still is out in early access. You guys have been talking about games like Dreadnought, and Elite Dangerous was always a popular one for a while back on Band of Gamers, and that was early access as well. So I think that the availability of that model, the availability of developers like Hello Games to bring in and take in feedback from their community and add that into the game is something that we didn't see a lot of in previous generations. So I think that that's a good example to me of pushing it forward.
Yeah, and I guess I'd chalk that the injector of that DNA into the miasmic swirl of the gaming industry to Mojang and what went down with Minecraft, right? Now it seems like it's definitely the branch of the family tree that allowed for things to be in these extended, never-ending long-term betas, right? Which typically wasn't a thing that happened in the past. So, I guess kudos. Again, I'm not a huge fan of early access, and it's kind of strange to me that the things that seem to be successful seem to be things that deliberately or definitively don't use that label. So I don't know. It's weird, but good.
Well, it's good if they're upfront about it. So, if your game is just being
are you about to go on a Star Citizen tirade?
No. I wasn't going to go that direction. But if they say, look, we want feedback, and they listen to the fans and they iterate. I was actually going to take this to the meta level. Zeus and I, coming from the development industry, and one of the buzzwords in the development industry is agile programming. So you have the methodology is you don't start off with this massive list of requirements and code, and then test, and then release it to the customer and say, here's your final product. You kind of try to define your goals, and you implement with a tight schedule called a sprint. You do your sprint, you implement a feature, and then you release it to your customer, and they can see it and they can evaluate it, and they can say, we like this, we don't like this. And as the sprints go on, the program might take an entirely different direction than anyone had intended, but because there's this ongoing feedback, the ultimate product is better. And I know you can't completely have like a free-form community developed game like that, but this idea of taking customer feedback and kind of integrating in the game is a positive trend. I don't want to see it as just using your customers as beta testers, quality. They're not QA, but allowing the fans to feel like part of a community can only be a good thing for your marketing.
So Swiss, you got us moving on a couple topics here in terms of that idea of the rapid development of games, but also I think one of the things it does there is it continues, if it's done well, is it builds a community around that game, right? There's this continual investment of those players. So you've got another potential trend here, another something that is building community kind of on a bigger scale as well. So what are some of your other observations that you have?
Well, this is kind of a global play for marketing, right? So Activision Blizzard with the Overwatch League, and I'm not a huge esports connoisseur. I don't seek it out to watch it or anything, but this feels like something different. So one of the things I like about the NFL is that Sundays feel like an event, right? You wait all week for the games, and the games are happening all day, and you're watching one game and you're keeping track of updates on the other, and you might have the Red Zone channel on, but you got that mixed in with fantasy football and everything, and there's this whole swelling of excitement that builds till the end of the week. And the NFL has seized on that, and they're doing an excellent job of marketing their product that way. Blizzard also knows how to play up events. You have BlizzCon, which, and they don't worry. I mean, they go to E3 and whatever, but they have their own convention, and it's a big deal. And they have Battle.net and World of Warcraft, and they have events in World of Warcraft. So they know about this whole, driving up fan excitement and fan participation. And now they want to attract people to Overwatch. So they could go the normal, appeal to gamers, have the media talk about the game, even have the in summer events or whatever in the game. But this is taking it to a whole nother level. They're kind of wanting to build a brand now, even beyond Overwatch. Like they want to be seen as the brand of professional gaming competition, right? So, if this takes off and they're investing heavily in it, they are going to establish quite a bit of visibility for their one product of Overwatch, but two, just for Activision Blizzard. There are other football leagues, but there's only one National Football League. So I think it's very interesting from just that marketing perspective. I think I heard that the teams, it's like a $20 million buy-in for this. So it's not some stunt that they're just going to abandon 6 months from now. And I think it's quite forward-thinking.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of kind of moving kind of the larger cultural perspective of games forward. So Zeus, do you have other pieces that you think are moving the industry forward, things that are pushing some, whether they're community development or business development aspects to games and game design?
Yeah, there's lots of small things, and I won't get into full detail on each of these because we're running pretty tight on our timeline. But Swiss kind of mentioned games as a service, right? So the whole Destiny model kind of shook things up, and now clearly every publisher is chasing that particular jewel. So we're going to see a lot more of that, which is fine. We credit Destiny a lot for that, but actually Microsoft kind of tried that a little bit with Flight Simulator 10, which was their last hurrah for Flight Simulator. I think Flight Simulator 10 was kind of pretty skinny, and then as things got developed for it, you could just then go pull it down and add it to your model. We talked last week, I think, because Digital Combat Simulator was on my list, and again, as much as I rail against free games, that's one where the core package is free, but then you go out and buy individual modules, and you can make it as expensive or as inexpensive as you would like. Plus, it's solidly supported by the mod community. So yeah, there's lots of things going on where people are changing the business model of the way we have traditionally purchased games. The Microsoft's Creator Studio is yet another kind of riff on Xbox Live Arcade. I think with even more freedom, where creators can publish their content directly to that platform. Then, of course, it's on us to kind of sift through the chaff, right? So that creates a certain democratization of gaming, where now in that environment you are more reliant on the curators who go in and investigate all those things and let you know what is good. So yeah, there's a number of things going on where people are kind of changing the traditional formula up.
Mentioning the mod community, just I know we're probably not going to have enough time to really discuss it, but didn't Bethesda just renounce basically this whatever, I don't know what their term they're calling it, but paid mods or something like that? So
yeah, some of their curated and paid content there. So Swiss, you've got a couple other things here that are changing the game or the way that games are played. So why don't you take us out on this topic before we head into our playlist?
Well, I think the biggest example that I could, when the idea was pitched about how the industry is changing and companies that are taking risks moving forward, I don't know if I'm just a Nintendo fanboy or not, but I thought of the Nintendo Switch, and DB in the pre-show had mentioned that you could see it as an iterative development. So we had the Wii, and then we had the Wii U, and now we have the Switch, and you can see the lineage there. But the Wii U was unsuccessful, commercially, and they kind of doubled down and said, we have a vision, and we're going to proceed with that vision. We want to make a tablet console, and so they've succeeded, I think, merging the couch console and the mobile platform into one platform. You've seen a lot of third-party developers jumping on board. You're seeing, I think Nintendo. I feel like this has been underplayed a little bit, but the announcement that there's going to be a mainline Pokemon title for the Nintendo Switch. I don't believe they've had ever just a mainline Pokemon game that's ever been anything but on the mobile platform. They've had one-offs and spin-offs on the consoles like Pokken Tournament or whatever, but never a mainline game. So that it might herald the end of the 3DS line, but the Switch is definitely a mobile platform, and you've made a mobile platform and has fully fleshed games on it. There's no there's good entertainment on the App Store, but it's not there's no Destiny and no Horizon Zero Dawn or anything like that, and you circumvent the problems of the App Store distribution and Google Play distribution. Now you have your own thing, and if they can continue to leverage it. They have the preeminent mobile platform now, mobile core gaming platform, and they if they can get their storefront going, that's potentially a huge windfall. In addition to all the money they're making just on the hardware sales. Well, I guess I don't know how well they're doing on hardware sales, but themselves. But I like the direction that they're going, and I like that they took the risk, and even after the Wii U's kind of failure, to proceed down that line of development.
And yeah, I just want to continue that theme, right? Like Swiss said, I think there's a lot of underselling that goes along with the conversation around the Switch, right? There's an amazing business renaissance that's going on in Nintendo, I believe. And nobody's come out and said it, but look at The Legend of Zelda and how the design of that game is inherently different. It skews far and away from what a traditional JRPG is. It is now the first Zelda game that I have ever liked and been able to stick with for any length of time. It is, if we still classify it as a JRPG, which I don't think it is, we probably need to come up with some different label to put on it. It's officially the first JRPG I've been able to stick with. Every game now gets criticized when you can't climb everything, even though I feel like that's becoming a bit tropish, so I'll skew away from that. But somebody at Nintendo walked in and said, let's change the script on our normal approach to game development. So that's going on. The things associated with the Nintendo platform, as like Swiss mentioned, with the store and third-party support. Nintendo is not raising the barriers that I feel they have historically raised to kind of make third-party developers feel like second-class citizens. So again, a little more democratization at the industry level around support for that platform. So I think they're definitely about the concept of kind of changing how they've approached the business, and I think it's definitely paying off and definitely visible.
So before we jump aboard the Nintendo bandwagon here, I am going to say that, yes, I think that they are, have really had the potential here to shift their business model, and certainly I agree with you, Swiss, in terms of what the Switch does. I think that the challenging piece that I see is, can they sustain it, right? That they've come out of the gates well, they've got a strong fall lineup, but the real question is going to be in 6 months from now as we move into the first part or the second fiscal year of the Switch. What does that lineup look like? And so, Zeus, if you're right, if it is a shift in their business model, they're going to be prepared for that. And if it is the old Nintendo that's not as responsive as they could be, we're going to see a different answer.
Right. I think the difference we're seeing right now is, and you're absolutely right, I've said the same thing, right, with the Wii. The Wii, touted a lot of third-party support, and then it just petered out, like you mentioned, after the first fiscal year. The difference is that I'm seeing, that I believe, the Wii was making money on the hardware, and so third-party developers weren't as incentivized. The Wii had a very poor attach rate, and what was getting attached were all first-party titles. Capcom launched I'm just going to call it a mediocre title that was a redo, right, on the Switch. They're seeing that the thing is printing money, right? So third-party developers are now. I don't think that'll keep, right? I think gamers and Switch owners will quickly tire of people doing shovelware onto the Switch platform, but it worked the first time around, and now people are. I think companies, publishers, developers are going, "Wow, what could we make? How much money could we make on the Switch if we actually put effort into it?" And I think that's a positive message. The key killer thing that's needed is Elder Scrolls needs to be a win, right? It's gone cold and silent. That's not good. But again, we are kind of in the bathtub between E3 and Gamescom and TGS. Something needs to be seen about Elder Scrolls, and it needs to land on time this fall in this holiday season for Switch owners. Or there's definitely danger that third-party momentum is going to get pulled up. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and talking about the proof will be in the upcoming year. You know, I remember I was chatting with someone, and they were already kind of lamenting back in late May, early June that, you know, after the initial rush of Zelda, and they had played through it, there really wasn't much out there for like a, you know, average Switch owner to latch onto. So you had, I guess, ARMS coming out that hadn't come out yet, and then you had to wait for Splatoon 2. So there was already a little bit of nervousness about the Nintendo lineup not being consistent as far as hitting like temporal milestones. In other words, it sounds like a lot of people picked up ARMS and a lot of people have picked up the Splatoon 2, but yeah, that concern I've already heard kind of whispers about that. So we'll see what happens after, you know, Mario Odyssey hits and what the future will hold.
So we have moved on from our topic here. We've covered lots of different kind of exciting potentials here, and some of these I think could be blown out or should be blown out into their own topics. And maybe if these kind of, you know, trends become full-on standards, we'll come back to them. We're certainly going to come back to conversations around the Nintendo Switch as we see more this fall, as Zeus was just talking about, and as we see more in the coming year. But let's move into our playlist. And in order to keep the Switch rolling, so Swiss, you've been playing a little bit on your you've been playing on your Switch as well. So what have you been playing there?
Like most people, Zelda Breath of the Wild. And as Zeus mentioned, you know, it is a very different Zelda game. Unlike Zeus, I happen to love the Zelda franchise, and Ocarina of Time is probably my most formative gaming experience. I remember waiting for that game, and the big story for me is always having my mom. She was the to put it on pre-order for me. I guess at the time she would still go to Sears and pre-order games at that time. And I remember I was supposed to get the gold cartridge, and they put too many pre-orders out for the gold cartridge, and my mother said, "No, it's okay. We'll just take the gray cartridge." That's my Ocarina of Time story. And you know, I every Christmas I never let her forget that. But I think that the Zelda model had been going stale. So I loved Ocarina of Time. Majora's Mask, they took some different chances with that, with the 3-day model. And then, you know, you had Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. And, you know, I played through them and I beat them, but they just did not have the same impact. And it just felt like, well, we'll just do Ocarina of Time, but bigger. And that's not always better. So they like Zeus says, they took a risk and they completely revamped with Breath of the Wild. And I really like the fact that I almost feel overwhelmed with what I can do when I'm on the map. So what I mean by that is, you know, with the old model games, you had your area, your overworld area. You had your dungeon. You kind of knew, okay, I got to go to Death Mountain now. Okay, I got to do the Fire Temple now. And you played through it, and they had that rhythm and that goal. But this, it's more, they're not giving you as much guidance, and they're letting you kind of define your adventure. So that's, I think, risky and difficult, because it could just turn into a boring a boring experience. You know, they wanted to do that with Wind Waker, and I found sailing from island to island rather tedious. But it seems to be working. Breath of the Wild. I really like the focused, not the temples. Now I can't even think of the word. Shrines, and you know, they're fun. They get in, you get to the meat of the puzzle, and you get out. So they weren't afraid to go back to the drawing board, and I want to commend them for that. The other game, I'm still trying to finish Batman Arkham Asylum. So I put a couple hours in, and you know, getting closer to the end. But hopefully, I got some other games in the backlog. So here in the next few episodes, you'll be hearing me play some fresher stuff. But I'm a creature of habit. I'm sorry.
So Zeus, we know that you are a creature of habit as well, as you described last episode, where you stick your games into a hopper and randomizer to decide what to play next. So that's not quite the same habit as Swiss here. But so what came out this week in terms of games for you to pick up and play?
So I continued playing Darkstar 1 on the PC. So it was kind of last week, kind of bled my previous week of Sim Week and Joystick Week kind of bled into this week. So I continued playing Darkstar 1. I shifted what PC I was playing on it, and a theme for this week was about trying to get things to play in 4K. So amazingly, again, I commented on this last time, right? Darkstar 1, which is a game that released 11 years ago, at some point went back and added 4K assets. So I don't know why, but the unfortunate thing is I couldn't get it to run on my secondary gaming PC, which is what I'm broadcasting from tonight. I was able to select the 4K option, but whenever when you switch resolutions on Darkstar 1, it requires you to quit the game and restart it. Whenever I came back to it, I could see the menu items, but the actual graphic, the splash screen on Darkstar 1 shows a trade station in the background, a space station. It wouldn't actually display. And when I would try to run the game, I could hear it, but it would just give me a black screen. So unfortunately, I had to step it back down to 1080p, but it played fine otherwise. So I also switched joysticks up this week. Last week I was playing on my Thrustmaster TCS.16000 flight control system with joystick and throttle attachment. This week I was using my Logitech Extreme 3D Pro, which is kind of more of like a space sim oriented controller with rudder control on the twist handle, but still a heavy bass, not metal, but still pretty high quality. So I played Darkstar 1, and then I went back and checked out Descent 3, which I really have always enjoyed. Actually pushed it, I think, a little further. Descent 3 is one of those games that I've probably played the first 2 levels like 89 times, but I haven't played any of the rest of the game. So I did push past the 2nd level. I think I'm actually on the 3rd level this time, and it's interesting and a much different challenge, right? The big thing on Descent 3 is it kind of twists you upside down and gives you a lot of vertigo, because the ship moves in what they call 6 points of freedom. So you can turn the ship and yaw it along this axis. You can roll it along this axis. Obviously, it has pitch, but the other big thing is it uses the 4-way directional hat switch, so it can also move up and down vertically and left and right horizontally. So mixing all of those axes of freedom creates a very interesting flight model. Most people that I have known who played that game use the auto-lev feature, where you could hit a button and it would immediately right your ship and reorient it to whatever space it was in and align you to the horizontal plane. I've never used auto-level, so it, like I said, kind of creates a unique experience. But it's incredible fun. I really enjoy it. So that wrapped up my kind of simulation time. I then switched over to the Xbox One and played some Forza Horizon 3 and Gears of War 4. Both of these games are games where I left off the last gameplay session of my campaigns on the PC. So again, I just was reminded how much I love Microsoft crossplay. Much better, I guess, than the Sony crossplay, just because one, I didn't own a Vita, and two, the games that they've chosen to implement it on are definitely more in my wheelhouse than the PlayStation games were. Forza Horizon 3, unfortunately, the tale of that tape is that is a driving game in a series that I've really come to like, but Forza Horizon 3 is the one that is not aging as well. I recently grabbed the original Forza Horizon via Xbox Live Gold and its backwards compatibility, and I've enjoyed playing that. I think that takes place in the U.S. In Wisconsin, I think, or Colorado. And I've had fun playing that. I love Forza Horizon 2, which takes place in Europe, which is kind of more where I enjoy racing. Really not a huge fan of Horizon 3's Outback setting in Australia. It's just a little too much off-road for me and cross-country. That racing mode and style has been in the series from the beginning, but it's very heavily prevalent in Horizon 3, almost to the point where you're almost never racing on road. And that feels imbalanced to me over the long haul. I was a fan of it when it first came out. Graphically and physics model-wise, it's beautiful. But it gets really aggravating to, get in a Lamborghini Diablo, right, and race it across the Australian outback when the other guy has a Range Rover, right? Or if I'm in a Range Rover to be losing races to a guy in a street-tuned Mustang. I kind of don't get that. So it's fine, but it's not my favorite racing game. I would like them to bring it back to the European setting in the next iteration. Had fun with Gears of War 4. That's just a campaign that it's in my backlog that I need to clean up. And then I wrapped up. I went back to the PC, broke out my Thrustmaster Ferrari 458 Italia wheel and pedals, and played some Dirt 4, which is a recent game, just came out in June. Heck of a lot of fun. Again, in this new era of gaming where I've got the wheel and pedals working consistently and I don't spend hours getting them set up like I used to, it's pretty great. That game, as I tweeted out, and is a positive in the current industry. What I tweeted is there's a lot of ad copy and a lot of discussion, mainly from the hardware manufacturers and some game developers and whatever, about 4K gaming and SLI support. The reality is there are very, 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 very few games, for the prevalence of the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 10 series cards, there are very few games out that are 4K and SLI enabled. Dirt 4 is one of those. So I was able to push it to 4K. It is SLI capable. I've got it on a 4K monitor, so kind of one of the few instances where I've been able to take full advantage of all the latest technologies. Like I said, got the wheel and pedals working. I had to put a little bit of a dead zone in there to get the wheel to loosen up, but plays pretty amazingly. That game didn't review super well. There are some people of it who are specifically not fans of it, but I really got it. I really enjoyed it, and I got into more of the campaign elements with, buying perks for my chief engineer. And buying my own vehicle. I like the livery thing on it. It's not as efficient as this is a Codemasters game, so the lineage includes Test Drive Unlimited and Grid 2, and the previous Dirt series. So in Grid, you could randomize your livery, so it was nice to just go in there and hit a button and you got a color scheme, and if you didn't like that color scheme, you could just hit the randomize button a couple times. You have to go in and tweak each color on this. But it has enough options in there where you can get through that kind of quickly. So I've got my team. I've got my Ford Focus RS, and the car's highly competitive in the beginner league. So loads of fun. I unfortunately didn't get a ton of time to play. You can see my primary gaming desktop behind me where there is not a wheel and pedal set up there because I had to take them down. But I had a huge amount of fun while I was playing it. So that is my playlist. And tonight I'm going to be switching over to play some on the NVIDIA Shield Portable.
So what are you playing on the Shield? Since we're talking about innovations with the Switch and the Nintendo Shield, so what are you playing there tonight?
Yeah, it's interesting because my former publisher, Joe Barhoom, who's captain of the ship over at Geeks Worldwide, tweeted out a question over the weekend about what were people playing on mobile, and my comment back to him was, I haven't played a mobile game since the Switch came out. But interestingly enough, then the Shield Portable came up in the hopper from the randomizer this time. So what I'm actually going to be playing is a game called Shadow Fight 2, which is a really gorgeous 2D fighting game where you only see the shadow silhouettes of the fighters, but it's amazingly fluid. It kind of looks and feels like you're watching Kung Fu Theater when you're playing it in 2D. It's not as jabby and kind of quick moving. Everything looks kind of very fluid and beautiful. So I'm going to play that, and I'm also going to be playing Sky Gambler Storm Raiders, which I think I've talked about before. Plays a lot like Blazing Angels. Really impressive as far as what it does on mobile. So I'm going to be playing that. I'm going to be doing some game capture with the AverMedia Game Capture HD2, my standalone game capture device. So that'll both of those will be going up on my YouTube channel probably closer to midweek or near the end of the week after I get a chance to edit them. So DB, we talked about sports. We mentioned that none of us are really big, huge sports fans, but you and I dabble. So
yes, we do. So no, I not only did I play a little bit of the NBA Live demo over the weekend, I also have been playing my franchise player in MLB The Show 17. So last I left the story, he was in AA ball and pitching, had a great ERA and had barely given up any runs or hits throughout his early career. He got moved up into AAA. And went from being a reliever and a closer to being a starter in AAA, which kind of seems a little strange to move up and suddenly be starting when you didn't start at all under AA. But we'll keep going. So yes, I've been enjoying that, and actually, I ended up picking up. I had purchased MLB The Show 14 back on the Vita a while ago, and picked that up just to compare different seasons. There's definitely some benefit of the portability aspect of it, of being able to pick it up and keep moving. But the gameplay and the graphics in 17 are just beautiful. So that's been my kind of sports story there. Although it is getting to be football season, which means that Madden may be back up in my list again at some point in time soon.
Now,
but,
I thought I saw you signed in on PSN over the weekend, and I thought I saw you playing Madden something. Was that not the case?
Not on PSN. No, it would have been.
Right.
It would have been the show. It would have been the show 14 and the show 17. So, yep. I don't think I was logged in as Madden yet. So on Xbox, though, I did play a little bit of Madden 17.
That may when I was playing Forza Horizon and Gears of War, that may have been where I saw you.
Yep. So yeah, after dabbling a little bit in NBA Live, I had my EA Sports game on a little bit and fired up 17 just to decide if, with a lot of the changes coming in 18 in terms of moving to the Frostbite engine and some of the story mode that they're playing out there in 18, after really loving the story mode and the road to the show in MLB The Show, it kind of got me thinking about, should I dive into a modern release, or should I just pick up the game that I have through EA Access and play some more? And so I went back into 17 there. So one of the things that you didn't see me logged in as was Monster Hunter Stories. So this is a 3DS game. This is a demo that came out last Thursday. It comes out in early September, the week before Metroid 2 or Metroid Return of Samus does. So it's been out in Japan for a while. This is going back to your JRPG mention, Zeus, that this is very much a JRPG. It has a little bit of, it's like Monster Hunter mixed with Pokemon. So Monster Hunter is a game where I've never been able to get into, and I've tried. The idea behind it is always interesting, but the mechanics and the systems and the fact that I've got to go craft something, and we all know how much people on this podcast love crafting. So I've never been able to get into it, but the stories plays out very much like it's very kind of anime like. It's very simplistic in terms of its graphical style. It's not the lush environments. It's very flat. But you end up getting kind of a red, blue, green, fire, water, earth type of wheel system here in terms of technical speed and power attacks, the rock, paper, scissors, and that you can play out different monsters have different attacks and different patterns, very much like they do in the actual mainline series, but kind of it's almost like My First Monster Hunter is what the game ends up being. Pretty fun. I really enjoyed my time. It was a good kind of grinding game for a night. The big question is whether that is enough to satisfy that interest. But I could also see it as a demo. If the demo actually carries over into the main game, so if you're interested, it's well worth picking up just to kind of dabble around. If you ever have enjoyed kind of the Pokemon or any type of JRPG, it's worth trying to try out here. But again, it's easy enough to set back down. The anime aspect may turn off some people because it's not kind of the realistic look that Monster Hunter usually has. So that was one of my cartoony games, but my other cartoony game, unlike you, Zeus, I did pick up a mobile game this past week, and it was after our conversation last week in terms of free-to-play aspects. So last Thursday, that Titanfall Assault, so the free-to-play mobile Titanfall game, which is published by Particle Effect Studios, but it's co-owned by Vince Capanella, right? One of the co-owners or the founders of Respawn also co-owns this mobile studio, and so it plays out. It was billed as kind of an RTS. You've got a map. You've got 3 capture points, kind of hard points. It plays out kind of like a conquest map or a hard point, where you're trying to capture a point, and you get points. First one to 100, you get points for holding a point, and then you can also attack the other player's base. You can play against the computer or against other players. And you've got a handful of different grunts and troops and turrets and all your different titans, both from Titanfall 1 and from Titanfall 2, that you can drop in. It ends up kind of like almost like a Hearthstone kind of card aspect to it, where you've got a certain a Titan costs 4 to 6 cards or points to drop down, where troops can cost 2 to 4 points depending on their rarity and their power. I really dug it for the first day, and then and there's a but coming, but it's not. I'm coming back to it still. I've been playing it each day. Playing it a little bit. The second day, I kind of bounced off it like, oh man. What I realized is it's kind of like a Clash of Clans or Clash Royale or whatever, right? Where in Clash Royale, you've got different cards and you're sending. It's almost like a tower defense where you're sending somebody up to crash up against the other player. And so there is some of that mechanic here as I kind of got further into the system and realizing. Go ahead.
I mentioned I kind of saw just today actually a review of it, and that's exactly what they said. It's basically takes a lot from Clash Royale, I haven't played any of those games, so I can't really speak to it. But
yeah, I haven't either. I mean, my kids continued to last year. They were really into Clash Royale and really tried to get me into it. Dad, you're gonna love it. And I never had any interest, but maybe it's the Titanfall skin that is getting me to come back and play it a little bit more. I enjoyed it enough over the first couple of days, so I plunked down $5. I got a couple extra cards. Again, I don't feel too bad about that because, the developers also put in a lot of time and money into this, so I'm not going to be a whale, but I certainly want to try to figure it out. I think the big question will be as I've gone to play against other players, I've definitely hit a wall where if I haven't leveled up my cards, and how much I'm going to be able to do that without continuing to grind or to put money in is going to be the question. So I'm liking the mechanics of it. I like the Titans, whether or not it gives me the depth that I'm looking for. But for right now, it's held my interest for at least the first 5 days. So yeah, I'm curious, Swiss, what else did they say in terms of the review? I haven't really read. I read a bunch of previews about it and kind of sold me on the idea of it, and I wanted to kind of dive in and play a little bit more. But I think the challenge is for somebody who hasn't played one of those types of if you have played a Clash game, you kind of got the sense of what you're supposed to be doing. But if you don't, I don't know that it really, so far, at least in the tutorials or in the menus, it hasn't really guided me through exactly how to feed my cards to each other a little bit and keep that system moving.
Yeah, I wish I could speak more to it, but I think as I was glancing at that article, there was a crisis at work, and then I got distracted. So,
well, that's good for the people at work, right? That's good to know that you did not spend your time reading about game reviews. So
yeah, but that had when you mentioned Clash Royale, that was the thrust of the article. That I think they were talking mostly about. I think it was on Eurogamer, but they were talking about mostly how what was wrong with Titanfall. Titanfall 2 was great. Why didn't it sell well? And I think when they talked about it in terms of this Titanfall mobile game, it like you said, it was a reskinned, and it wasn't. It couldn't stand on its own, I guess. I'm not sure, but that was the thrust of the 10 seconds that I read the article.
Yeah, that is. It came out that's today actually. So it is a Eurogamer. Titanfall smartphone game offers a possible insight into why the series is struggling. So yeah, that is the article there, and it might be a good read for people who are interested in a little bit more about this. But again, lots of options this week in terms of what we've been playing, whether it's some big meaty titles with the Switch or some great technical titles that Zeus talked about with his wheel and pedals, or some bite-sized pieces that I mentioned as well. So gentlemen, we are past our hour mark. So before we turn it over and close this one off for the books, I want to turn it back over to you guys to see if you have any final thoughts or comments as we head out of tonight's show.
My only comment, a little bit of network channel housekeeping for the E2KG network. So I'll just mention that this is my, barring any staff outages, this is my last appearance on the discussion show for the month of August. I'll be off the next 2 weeks covering the news desk for the next couple of weeks. So I will talk to you guys in our big gaming discussion show in September. But I am sure that DB Prime and Swiss will do us an honor and keep up the quality of the conversation.
I'll try not to derail us too badly, but I just to bring it back to the original topic at hand. We did talk a little bit about Hellblade, and so Ninja Theory, they pretty much had said explicitly, we want to bring back the AA title. So one of the developers, our aim is to bring back the mid-sized games. So Hellblade is half the size of a AAA game, but sold at half the price. So I think the entire game was literally an experiment to see if this model could work. And I also want to mention Prime. And he did ask us to pass along that he has not touched his Xbox the past month since he got his Nintendo Switch, and he has exclaimed, "Long live Nintendo." So I don't know if that's going to come as a shock to our listeners, but it actually happened.
Well, that's a good way to end this series. As we're talking about industry developments and trends, who would have thought that we could have pulled Prime away from his Xbox and the Xbox Live? So the Switch, as you mentioned, Swiss, in terms of pushing things forward and trying some different approaches to gaming, has certainly worked on Prime. So, gentlemen, Zeus, we are going to miss you for the next couple of nights, the next couple of weeks. I am going to be out this Thursday, so good luck and enjoy the newscast, everyone. And thank you for keeping that rolling. But I will be back next week, and until then, we will always be enough to keep you going. Have a good night.